Welcome to Green Radio, your frequency for the planet. We dive into the stories that shape our shared home, connecting the dots between the global and the local. It's time to listen, learn, and act. Let's start today's episode.
I want you to imagine, just for a second, that you are standing right in the middle of the Atacama Desert in Chile.
Okay.
You're looking out at the horizon, but instead of this, vast, empty expanse of sand and rock, you are staring up at a mountain.
Right.
A literal mountain made of 46 million tons of discarded, rotting clothing, just stretching on and on.
Yeah, it's a profound and, frankly, a pretty disturbing visual.
It really is. It's this towering, neon-colored monument of synthetic fabrics just baking in the relentless sun and shedding invisible microplastics right into the wind.
And it perfectly captures the sheer scale of what we are dealing with when we look at the physical health of our planet right now.
Exactly. So, welcome to this deep dive. Today, we have a massive stack of research on the table.
We really do.
Our primary source is this incredibly comprehensive 2026 report from Earth.org, and it meticulously details the 16 biggest environmental challenges facing our world today. Now, whether you are prepping for a debate or trying to catch up on global news, or you're just insanely curious about where the Earth actually stands, this deep dive is your ultimate shortcut to being well-informed.
Yeah.
But let me establish our mission right out of the gate here. We're not here to drown you in doom and gloom.
Far from it. I mean, the objective today is clarity.
Right.
Because when you just look at a list of 16 massive global crises, human psychology kicks in, and it just feels, paralyzing.
It's totally paralyzing. You just want to tune it out.
Exactly. So we want to demystify the mechanisms behind these issues so you can actually understand the big picture.
Because I think the most interesting takeaway from the Earth.org data isn't the individual statistics themselves, it's how they all interact.
What's fascinating here is that while these 16 problems are categorized separately in the source material, they aren't isolated in the real world.
Right, they're not operating in vacuums.
No, not at all. They function as one massive interconnected biological and economic web. Pulling on one thread in the ocean inevitably unravels a completely different thread in a data center halfway across the globe.
So let's start with the overarching umbrella covering the entire planet right now, which is record-breaking global heat.
Yeah.
The data confirms that 2024, 2023, and 2025 are the 3 warmest years on record in that exact chronological order.
Which is wild to think about.
It is. And we've got greenhouse gases, so
Yeah.
carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, just sitting at their highest concentrations ever recorded.
Right.
But how does that invisible gas actually translate to the heat you feel when you step outside your front door? Like, what's the actual mechanism there?
Well, it really comes down to atmospheric physics. These gases are incredibly durable. They don't just dissipate overnight.
Okay.
When they accumulate, they fundamentally change the composition of our atmosphere to act like kind of like a one-way mirror.
One-way mirror.
Yeah. So the sun's high-energy radiation passes through just fine, right? But when the Earth tries to radiate that heat back out into space as infrared energy, these gas molecules absorb it and bounce it back down.
Oh, wow. So it just gets trapped.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We're essentially wrapping the planet in a thicker and thicker thermal blanket. And because those gases stay in the atmosphere for decades or even centuries, the extreme heat we are experiencing right now is, unfortunately, already physically baked into the system for the long term.
Which makes finding a coordinated global strategy to stop emitting those gases absolutely critical.
Right.
But the Earth.org document details a major roadblock here, which is the deep politicization of the climate crisis.
Yeah, and to be absolutely clear here, the source material isn't making a partisan judgment. It is strictly analyzing policy outcomes and structural hurdles.
Just reporting the facts on the ground.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It notes that the scientific consensus has basically morphed into a deeply fractured political battleground.
Right.
So differing ideologies regarding government intervention, along with the massive economic footprint of the fossil fuel industry, well, they're making global treaties incredibly difficult to enforce.
Yeah, for instance, the report tracks how the United States, under the Trump administration, saw significant rollbacks of environmental policies and, a withdrawal from various international climate treaties.
Right.
But it's not just an isolated phenomenon. The data also documents the European Union noticeably backtracking on its own climate agenda, which historically had been considered the most ambitious framework in the world.
Yeah, and the gridlock is perhaps most visible at these massive international summits.
Oh, definitely.
The document points out that the recent COP30 conference actually concluded without any official mention of a fossil fuel phase-out.
Wait, really?
Yeah. And contextually, the report notes that roughly 1 in 25 attendees at that climate summit, which is about 1,600 people, were actually official representatives of the fossil fuel industry.
Okay, I have to jump in on that. Because hosting a global conference to figure out how to stop carbon emissions, but having 1 out of every 25 people in the room represent fossil fuels.
It's a striking statistic.
It's crazy. That sounds a bit like hosting a medical summit on how to quit smoking, but inviting an army of tobacco executives to help write the rules.
Yeah, it perfectly illustrates the intense economic cross-currents that the report says are stalling actionable consensus right now.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because while politicians are arguing over oil and gas, the report reveals there is a completely different, almost invisible engine driving up our energy demands right under our noses.
Artificial intelligence.
Yes, AI. We assume digital things have no physical weight, but the environmental cost of our tech is just staggering.
It really is.
According to the data, OpenAI's initial training of the GPT-3 model consumed 1,287 megawatt hours of electricity.
Which is a massive number.
Just to visualize that, it's enough electricity to power more than 120 U.S. homes for an entire year, just to teach the program how to speak.
And that is just the training phase.
Right.
The daily energy required to actually run the AI generating responses, writing code, creating images, that makes up over 60% of its total carbon footprint.
Wow.
But the mechanism that is most concerning, actually, is the water consumption.
Wait, water? Why does a software program need water?
Because the cloud isn't actually up in the sky.
Right.
The cloud is a massive warehouse filled with thousands of supercomputers working simultaneously. And those processors generate a phenomenal amount of physical heat.
How sure, like how a laptop gets hot.
Exactly. So to prevent the hardware from literally melting down, data centers rely on evaporative cooling towers. They pump millions of gallons of fresh water through the system to absorb the heat and evaporate it away.
Millions of gallons.
Yeah. The Earth.org projections estimate that by 2027, the global water withdrawal required just to keep AI running could be 4 to 6 times the total annual water use of the entire country of Denmark.
That is insane. So every time you politely type please and thank you to ChatGPT, it's basically the environmental equivalent of leaving your refrigerator door wide open while the data centers chug a 500 milliliter plastic water bottle for every 10 to 50 questions you ask.
That is an incredibly accurate and, well, troubling analogy.
I am genuinely floored by that. The things that make our modern lives so convenient feel totally weightless to us, but they are secretly pulling massive levers on the physical Earth.
Absolutely.
And all that excess heat generated by fossil fuels and these endless data centers, it doesn't just vanish, it absorbs into our geography, specifically our oceans.
Right. The report explains that the oceans essentially act as the Earth's sponge, absorbing roughly 30% of all the carbon dioxide we emit.
Which I guess is saving us from unlivable atmospheric temperatures on land.
It is, but it is destroying the ocean's chemistry in the process.
Yeah.
When you pump that much carbon dioxide into salt water, it triggers ocean acidification.
I've heard that term thrown around a lot, but what does it actually mean for the water, like functionally?
Think of it like osteoporosis of the sea.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. The carbon dioxide reacts with the water molecules, lowering the pH level and reducing the concentration of carbonate ions.
Right.
And those ions are the essential building blocks that marine organisms need to build their shells and skeletons.
So they just can't grow.
Worse, when the water becomes too acidic, not only can oysters, clams, and corals no longer build their structures, but their existing shells actually begin to dissolve away into the water.
The water is literally robbing them of their bones.
Precisely. It breaks the fundamental symbiotic relationships in the reef. And then, the rising heat causes the corals to expel the algae that give them life and color, leading to mass coral bleaching.
Right. We see those photos of just stark white reefs.
Exactly. The report estimates that if this chemical and thermal trajectory holds, coral reefs could be entirely wiped out by the year 2050.
That's our lifetime. And while the ocean's chemistry is turning acidic, its sheer volume is expanding because all this heat is melting our land ice at just an incomprehensible rate.
The numbers from Greenland are hard to wrap your head around, honestly.
Yeah, like in 2019, Greenland lost an average of 1 million tons of ice per minute.
A minute. Yeah.
And all of that fresh water pouring into the sea is causing global sea levels to rise by an average of 3.2 millimeters a year.
Right. And if you live hundreds of miles inland, or even in a coastal high-rise, 3.2 millimeters might sound invisible to you.
Like it's nothing.
Yeah. But the cumulative compounding effect of that rise is catastrophic. The report projects that over the century, sea level rise threatens to permanently flood coastal regions that are currently home to anywhere from 340 million to 480 million people.
The geopolitical implications of that kind of mass human displacement, I mean, it's almost unfathomable.
It really is.
And humans aren't the only ones losing their homes. This physical shifting of the planet's baseline is actively driving a sixth mass extinction.
Yes.
The data shows a 68% decline in global wildlife populations between 1970 and 2016. The emperor penguins in Antarctica, for example, are facing total population collapse by 2100. But wait, walk me through that domino effect. Why does the ice melting automatically equal penguins going extinct?
Well, because an ecosystem is basically a delicate house of cards. Emperor penguins breed on the sea ice. So, no ice, no breeding grounds.
Okay, that makes sense.
Furthermore, the underside of that sea ice is where microscopic algae grow. And that algae feeds the krill, the tiny shrimp-like crustaceans.
Right.
When the ice melts, the algae dies, the krill population crashes, and the penguins who rely on the krill for food starve.
Wow.
Yeah. The physical change dictates the biological collapse.
And then we compound that biological stress with our own harvesting. The report states that 30% of all commercially fished waters are overfished. We are just extracting fish significantly faster than their reproductive cycles can replace them.
Exactly.
But there is a really strange paradox in the data here. It notes that 90% of the world's fishermen are actually small-scale operations, just local crews and small boats.
Right.
So if most of the fishermen are small-scale, how are we wiping out the entire ocean?
Because global consumption has just exploded. As a global population, we are eating twice as much seafood as we did 50 years ago.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. The sheer insatiable volume of human demand means even small-scale fleets, combined with the massive industrial trawlers, are stripping the oceans bare.
But the report does highlight a pivot here, right? Like, there are major international policy frameworks attempting to stop this bleeding.
Yes, and this is where we see crucial biological interventions. The Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework established what is known as the 30 by 30 target.
Right, I've heard of that.
It's an international pledge to formally protect 30% of the Earth's land and water by the year 2030.
Okay.
We recently saw Morocco step up to ratify the High Seas Treaty, which is a massive legal mechanism to create marine protected areas in international waters.
That's huge.
It is. And looking at land conservation, Colombia just designated over 1 million hectares of protected land for the uncontacted Yuri-Pasay people.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, which inherently acts as a shield for immense tropical biodiversity.
Okay, so what does this all mean? Because I have to push back a little on this idea.
Sure.
We just established that the oceans are turning to acid and the overall temperature is rising. Isn't drawing a protected line on a map and aiming for 30% conservation just like locking the door to one room while the rest of the house burns down?
It's a fair point.
Like, how does a legal treaty stop the water inside that protected zone from becoming acidic?
That is exactly the right question to ask. You are correct. A line on a map cannot stop a thermal current or carbon dioxide.
Right.
However, what a marine protected area does is remove localized trauma.
Localized trauma.
Yeah. If a coral reef is trying to survive in warming, acidic water, it is under extreme biological stress. If you simultaneously drag heavy fishing nets over it and pollute it with agricultural runoff, it dies.
It's just too much all at once.
Exactly. But if you legally protect that zone, you remove the overfishing and the pollution. The reef is still dealing with the heat, but because it isn't fighting 3 other battles at the exact same time, its ecosystem becomes exponentially more resilient.
Oh, I get it.
It is about buying these species the time and the biological strength to adapt to the changing chemistry.
Okay, that actually makes total sense. We can't stop the heat immediately, so we have to stop kicking them while they're down.
Exactly.
We give them a fighting chance. But if the ocean is being depleted and protected, it means we have to lean even harder on the land to feed a growing population.
We do.
Which brings up this incredibly tragic consumption paradox in the report. We are devouring the earth to grow our food, and then we are just throwing the harvest in the trash.
The land use statistics are staggering here. We are currently losing forests at a rate of 300 football fields every single hour.
Every hour.
Yes. The Amazon rainforest alone is being cleared at a rate of 1.5 million hectares a year, primarily to make way for agriculture.
And it's not even efficient agriculture. The source points out that 60% of the world's agricultural land is entirely dedicated to cattle ranching, but cattle only provide 24% of the global meat supply.
Right.
Why is the math on that so incredibly skewed?
Because of the caloric conversion ratio. A cow is a living, breathing, walking animal.
Yeah.
It burns energy just existing. You have to feed a cow massive amounts of grain and water for years, and a huge percentage of those calories are just burned off as body heat and metabolism.
Oh, so the energy doesn't go into the meat.
No. The return on investment for human food is biologically terrible. It takes drastically more land and water to produce 1 calorie of beef than it does to produce 1 calorie of grain or vegetables.
And in our rush to grow all that feed and food, we are destroying the foundation of life itself, which is the dirt.
Yeah, the soil.
The report states that 40% of the planet's soil is heavily degraded, largely due to traditional farming practices like over-tilling and the heavy use of chemical fertilizers.
Right.
Now, I understand fertilizers can be toxic, but what is so bad about tilling? I mean, I thought churning the soil was how you prepare it for seeds.
In the short term, yeah, tilling mixes surface nutrients, which looks good for one harvest. But over the long term, a plow acts like a tornado ripping through a city. Soil is not just dead dirt. It is a complex, living organism. It is held together by vast, delicate fungal networks called mycelium and complex root structures.
Okay.
Tilling physically slices all of that up. It destroys the architecture of the soil, turning a living ecosystem into lifeless dust that just cannot hold water.
That's terrifying.
It is. Because of this, the report highlights that the Earth's topsoil is currently eroding 100 times faster than nature can naturally replenish it.
Wait, hold on. If our topsoil is blowing away, the Earth.org data projects that we could actually produce 40% less food in 20 years.
Yes.
We have 820 million people going hungry today and 2.7 billion people who find water scarce for at least 1 month of the year. If we are facing a 40% decline in food production, how is it mathematically possible that we are wasting so much food?
It is the ultimate paradox of modern logistics and consumer demand.
The report states that 1/3 of all food intended for human consumption, so that is 1.3 billion tons of food, is wasted every single year.
Yeah.
That is enough caloric energy to feed 3 billion people. And it isn't just rotting on trucks.
No, it's not.
In the United States, more than 50% of all produce thrown away, roughly 60 million tons of fruits and vegetables, is tossed in the garbage simply because it looks too ugly for supermarket shelves.
It perfectly exposes the absurdity of the system.
It is completely absurd. We are literally bulldozing the Amazon rainforest, slicing up the mycelium that keeps the soil alive, and draining our freshwater aquifers just so we can throw away a perfectly nutritious apple in the U.S. because it has like a slight weird bump on it.
Yeah.
How did human survival become this disconnected from reality?
It is driven by a hyper-consumer culture in the global north that prioritizes superficial aesthetics and convenience above all else.
Right.
We treat the Earth's harvest as disposable. And that exact same mindset, the illusion of disposability, is the root cause of the final set of challenges in the report.
Okay.
The toxic byproducts of what we wear, what we breathe, and what we drive.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because this brings us full circle right back to that mountain of rotting clothes in the Atacama Desert.
Right.
The report explicitly states that the fast fashion industry produces more atmospheric emissions than the entire aviation and shipping sectors combined.
Because the business model of fast fashion requires the endless, rapid-fire production of incredibly cheap clothing to match internet microtrends.
Yeah.
And to make clothes that cheap, you don't use cotton. You use synthetics like polyester and nylon.
Which means your trendy new shirt is basically just wearable oil.
Exactly. It is a plastic product. And when it gets discarded in places like the Atacama, it doesn't biodegrade.
It just sits there.
The sun bakes it, and it slowly splinters apart into millions of microplastics that leach into the soil and the water table.
Which feeds right into the broader plastic crisis. The report notes that 14 million tons of plastic enter our oceans every year, and 91% of all the plastic ever manufactured has never been recycled. Yeah. The UN attempted to draft legally binding treaties to finally curb plastic pollution during summits in Busan and Geneva, but the report documents that those talks ultimately failed to secure an agreement.
Which is incredibly frustrating.
It is. Meanwhile, the very air we are breathing is polluted. airborne toxins and particulate matter cause up to 7 million premature deaths a year worldwide. And in regions like South Asia, the pollution is so thick it is cutting average life expectancy by 5 full years.
And this is where human ingenuity usually steps in, right?
Right.
We see these massive pollution problems, and we immediately try to invent a technological solution to fix them. We build electric vehicles to stop the air pollution. We shift to green energy.
Yeah.
But the source material highlights a massive ethical and environmental blind spot in this transition.
I call it outsourcing our guilt.
Exactly.
Because our modern technological solutions, they rarely solve the root problem. They usually just relocate the pollution to a poorer country.
Right.
Take electric vehicles. If you want to build an EV battery, you need cobalt. As the global demand for clean electric cars skyrockets, the demand for cobalt goes through the roof. And the world's largest supplier of cobalt is the Democratic Republic of Congo.
And the mining conditions in the DRC are devastating.
Yeah.
The Earth.org report details horrific worker exploitation, unregulated toxic runoff leaching into local rivers, and clouds of pulverized rock dust that cause severe long-term respiratory diseases for the local communities.
That's awful.
But there is an even darker layer. The southern regions of the DRC naturally hold massive deposits of uranium alongside the cobalt.
Oh, no.
The researchers document that the people mining these minerals for our clean energy transition are being exposed to dangerously high levels of radioactivity.
So we buy a sleek new electric vehicle or a jacket made out of recycled bottles, and we feel amazing about ourselves in the global north.
Right. We pat ourselves on the back.
We feel like we are saving the planet. But the physical reality is we're just moving the radioactive dust to the lungs of workers in the DRC, and we're moving the microplastics to a desert in Chile.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, looking across the entirety of these 16 crises, whether we are talking about the massive water demands of AI data centers, the staggering inefficiency of cattle ranching, the cobalt for our green cars, or the overfishing of the oceans,
Right.
the underlying mechanism is completely identical. We have an economic model that relies on extracting physical resources from the Earth drastically faster than the Earth's biological systems can naturally replenish them.
Yeah.
We are attempting to run an infinite growth model on a fundamentally finite planet.
And if you are listening to this right now, letting the weight of 16 interconnected global crises settle in, it can feel entirely overwhelming. It is a heavy reality to carry.
It really is.
But the reason we dive into a comprehensive report like this isn't to induce panic, it's to find the leverage points. The Earth.org source provides a clear roadmap for action, proving that agency still exists.
Absolutely. I mean, the structural changes they outline begin with civic action. Voting for climate initiatives and supporting candidates who prioritize aggressive environmental protection is the most effective way to force top-down systemic change.
But the bottom-up changes matter just as much. You can reduce your personal energy footprint by prioritizing public transit or renewable sources if they are available to you.
Yeah, that's huge.
You can financially support the environmental NGOs that are actively holding corporate polluters accountable in the courts. You can make an immediate daily impact by shifting your habits toward a more plant-based diet, which directly removes the pressure from that incredibly inefficient agricultural land we talked about.
Exactly.
And most importantly, you can amplify the voices of the grassroots climate activists who are doing the grueling work on the front lines.
Every single one of those actions pushes the needle. But as we step back and look at the entirety of this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final structural question to really mull over.
Okay, let's hear it.
We spend so much time and capital talking about transitioning to green technology to save ourselves.
Right.
But if training our AI models, building our electric vehicles, and sustaining our current diets still requires ripping apart the Earth's crust for minerals and draining our freshwater aquifers dry, do we need to fundamentally redefine what human progress actually means?
Wow.
Are we truly trying to save the biological health of the planet, or are we just desperately trying to save our current high-consumption way of life?
That is the exact question we all need to be asking ourselves every time we look at a new technological miracle. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the world around you. Keep looking for the hidden connections between the things you buy and the earth they come from.
Absolutely.
And the next time you go to throw away a slightly bruised apple or a perfectly good piece of clothing, remember that neon mountain in the desert. We will catch you next time.